They told us redemption was possible, that a man could wash away his sins in blood and fire. But out here, on the edge of a nameless world, the only thing that cleanses is the lasburn across flesh and the screams swallowed by the mud. We were the forgotten, the condemned, the penal legion of the Astra Militarum, chained men wearing the Emperor's uniform, each heartbeat borrowed, each breath a debt. You don't march for glory when your every step could trigger the explosive collar hugging your throat. You march because stopping means the collar will sing. And in that song lies the only promise the Imperium keeps. If the weight of this grim, dying galaxy grips you, if you've ever wondered what it truly means to fight, bleed, and die as a nameless soul beneath the golden banners of a god who never speaks, then stay with me. Like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next descent into the Emperor's darkest legions. Together, we'll walk through the fire and see what remains when humanity itself becomes the punishment. The light in the cell was the color of old bones, pale, sickly, and forever trembling against the hum of the Hive's endless machinery. Time didn't move here. It only lingered, thick as the grime clinging to the walls. The air was metallic, filled with the scent of rust and the sour breath of 1,000 lives forgotten by the Imperium. I had stopped counting the days long ago. In the dark, days had no meaning. Only the waiting did. Waiting for the next ration of corpse starch. Waiting for sleep that never came. Waiting for judgment that never would. When the boots came, they came without sound. 3 pairs, heavy, deliberate. You could always tell an arbitrator's step. It wasn't haste or anger that drove it, but certainty. The kind of certainty that belonged to those who served the Lex Imperialis, not mercy. I stood before they even opened the door. Some part of me already knew. Every prisoner does, in the end. The door slid aside with a sigh of hydraulics, and the light from the corridor poured in like cold fire. They said nothing. They didn't have to. One lifted a data slate and read my number aloud, his Vox grill turning it into a death sentence without emotion. My name, whatever it once was, didn't matter anymore. In the Imperium, names are for the living, numbers are for the dead, or for those who will be soon enough. They bound my wrists in steel and affixed the red mark to my chest. Penal Conscription Order 77451, Astra Militarum Command. There was no trial. There never is. The Emperor's justice doesn't need to explain itself to the condemned. The corridors outside the cells stank of oil and disinfectant. We were marched in silence past other inmates, pressing against the bars, eyes hollow, some whispering prayers to gods that don't listen. The arbitrators didn't acknowledge them. Their armor gleamed dull in the light, scratched by centuries of service. But the Aquila stamped into every pauldron still caught your eye. It reminded you what awaited at the end of the march. Not freedom, not life, but purpose. The kind of purpose that chewed men up and spat them out as examples. The train waited in the sub-level below the prison. It wasn't like any transport I'd seen. The cars were black, sealed, marked with the sigil of the Commissariat, and the words, "Servitude through death." The air hissed as the doors opened. Inside, benches lined with restraints faced one another like pews in a chapel of iron. One by one, we were pushed in, locked down, and stripped of anything human. Names, rights, fear. The hum of the engine started low, like the growl of something ancient and hungry. Someone across from me whispered, "Where are they taking us?" His voice trembled like a wire about to snap. Another man answered without looking up, "To die, brother. To die wearing the Emperor's colors." The words hung in the air, heavy, final. The arbitrator at the door heard him but didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence said enough. The train lurched forward, rattling into the endless dark of the Hive's lower arteries. No windows, no sense of direction, Only the sound of wheels grinding over old iron and the occasional cough of a man too weak to keep it in. Someone began to pray, muttering lines from the litany of remission. Others joined, their voices thin and cracked. I didn't. I'd forgotten the words long ago. Or maybe they'd forgotten me. Hours passed. Or maybe days. Time fractured in the dark. Then the brakes screamed and the doors opened again, this time to light. Blinding, pale daylight. The air outside was cold, dry, and heavy with dust. The train had stopped at what looked like a manufactorum turned camp. Rusted towers, smokestacks bleeding into a gray sky, and banners of the Aquila fluttering above it all. Hundreds of soldiers stood in formation. Not free men, but prisoners like us. Their collars glinted in the light, small black bands with blinking red diodes. Death, worn like jewelry. Commissar waited at the platform, long coat whipping in the wind, his cap gleaming with the Imperium's twin-headed eagle. His face was a scar carved into authority, and his voice carried over the crowd with vox-amplified precision. Convicts of the Imperium, he said, your crimes are forgiven only through service. You are now property of the Astra Militarum. You will serve until death redeems you, or until your collars choose otherwise. The crowd shifted uneasily. Somewhere near the back, a man tried to run. It was reflex, not rebellion. He made it 3 steps before his collar detonated. A flash of red, a sharp pop, and then silence. The rest of us didn't even breathe. The commissar smiled faintly, as if the explosion were punctuation. Discipline, he said, is the path to salvation. The guards began herding us forward toward processing lines. The sound of chains filled the air, a chorus of inevitability, and as I shuffled forward, the words echoed in my head. Discipline is the path to salvation. Maybe it was. Or maybe salvation was just another word for dying on someone else's terms. When they fitted the collar around my neck, the metal was colder than I imagined. It clicked shut with mechanical certainty, and for a moment, I could feel my pulse hammering against it, a reminder that from now on, even that rhythm didn't belong to me anymore. The sky above was the color of ash. The camp stretched beyond sight, filled with rows of condemned souls marching toward battlefields that would never remember them. And somewhere in the distance, a siren began to wail. Not warning, not alarm. It sounded almost like a hymn. They called it Transit 77, though it was less a journey and more a descent. Not from one place to another, but from one kind of damnation into a deeper one. The transport shook and screamed as it tore through the skies of some forgotten world. The air inside was hot, close, and rank with sweat, oil, and fear. Dozens of us sat chained to our seats, collars blinking in steady rhythm like the heartbeat of a machine god that demanded obedience. Every man here was a story already erased. Thieves, deserters, murderers, and the ones who claimed innocence were the loudest, as if words could undo the ink already dry on the Lex registers. I sat between a man missing half his teeth and another whose eyes never stopped twitching. The first kept whispering numbers under his breath, counting every second like he could reach the end by sheer will. The second stared straight ahead, whispering the same name over and over, a name I didn't recognize. Maybe it was someone he'd killed, maybe someone he'd lost. It didn't matter anymore. Out here, the only name that mattered was the one the collar knew. The Vox speakers crackled above our heads. A voice spoke, flat and mechanical, probably a servitor, stripped of all human inflection. All personnel, prepare for disembarkation. Failure to comply with induction protocol will result in immediate correction. The word correction hung in the air like a blade. No one moved. No one needed to. The correction was always the same. The man across from me, the one muttering numbers, started laughing softly. Correction! he said. "That's a kind way of saying they'll blow your emperor-forsaken head off." A guard slammed his rifle butt against the bars. The laughter stopped. The transport descended with a bone-deep shudder. Outside, through narrow slits in the hull, I could see a world of gray wastelands and slag mountains. Smoke poured from broken chimneys. Factories stood like dead gods, their spires leaning against the wind. This was where they would forge us into soldiers, or corpses, depending on how the Emperor judged our worth. When the ramp dropped, the light hit like a hammer. Harsh, blinding. A cold wind swept through the hold, carrying dust that tasted of metal and ash. We were herded out in ranks, each step synchronized by the chain links connecting us. Guards lined the path, not soldiers, but servitors fused with armor, their faces gone, their weapons grafted into what was once flesh. Their hollow eyes followed us without recognition. At the far end stood a platform. On it, a tech priest of the Adeptus Mechanicus worked in silence, his mechadendrites twitching and coiling like serpents. Before him was a table lined with collars, each one identical, each humming faintly with internal charge. He didn't look at us. To him, we weren't people. We were defective tools waiting to be recalibrated. The commissar from the transport strode past us, cloak flaring like a black flame. "Welcome, legionnaires," he announced. "Your crimes have condemned you, but your deaths will cleanse you. Serve with obedience, and you may yet be remembered as men. Falter, and you will serve as fertilizer for the next generation of the faithful." The first man stepped forward. The collar went on, the red light blinked once, then steadied. One by one, the rest followed. When it was my turn, the tech priest's mechadendrite slid around my throat, fitting the device snug against my skin. The metal was cold and absolute. I heard a click, then the faint hum of the power cell activating. My pulse quickened beneath it, and for a heartbeat I thought, or hoped, it might stop right there. The commissar's gaze met mine as he passed. His eyes were the color of old stone. "You are not a man anymore," he said softly, almost kindly. "You are penance made flesh." They marched us through the camp afterward, past barracks of corrugated steel, past firing ranges where drones barked orders, past pyres where failed initiates were burned as examples. The sky was a constant shade of iron, and even the light seemed filtered through smoke. Above the entrance gate, a banner read in bold, high Gothic, "Death is the Emperor's mercy." That night, we were fed nutrient gruel that smelled faintly of oil and decay. The men ate in silence, chained to their bunks. The only sounds were the distant roar of engines and the soft hum of the collars. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows twist with the movement of floodlights outside. Someone wept softly in the dark. Another man recited the litany of faith, his voice shaking with every word. I closed my eyes and thought of the prison, of the cell, the silence, the certainty of oblivion. Funny how the mind clings to even its worst cages once freedom reveals its price. Near dawn, the sirens blared again. The guards stormed in, shouting orders, herding us toward the parade square. The commissar waited, flanked by soldiers of the regular Astra Militarum, clean, uniformed, and disgusted by the sight of us. He raised his bolt pistol and fired into the sky. The shot cracked like thunder. "Tomorrow," he declared, "you earn your redemption in battle." The collars pulsed once, in unison. 100 red lights glowing in the gray morning mist. None of us spoke. We didn't need to. We all understood the truth. The Emperor didn't send us to win. He sent us to die loudly enough that someone else might live a little longer. And in that silence, that grim, collective understanding, the Penal Legion was born. The dawn that came was not golden, not soft. It was the color of burnt steel and choking ash. The air itself seemed to resist being breathed. Rows of us stood at attention, collars humming faintly, eyes hollow. We wore no armor save for thin flak vests scavenged from the dead. No insignia, no honor markings, just the same rust-brown fatigues and the same smell. Oil, sweat, fear, and resignation. A commissar walked the line, his boots clicking on the ferrocrete like a metronome of judgment. He didn't speak, only watched. Watching was enough. The Vox speakers screamed with static. Then the cold monotone of a servitor's voice cut through the air. Deployment protocol initiated. Penal detachment, 77. Embark immediately. The ramp of the lander lowered with a shriek of metal. Inside it was dark and narrow, lined with restraints and the tang of machine oil. A tech priest waited by the door, reciting a litany of ignition in binary murmurs. His face was half mask, half flesh, the expressionless devotion of a creature that had long forgotten pain. We were shoved inside, one after another, packed tight like offerings into a sarcophagus. The hatch slammed shut, sealing us in the belly of the beast. The world shrank to vibration and breath. Someone muttered a prayer, someone else laughed. A dry, humorless sound. Then came the jolt. The lander lifted, and gravity fell away like mercy. The engines roared so loud they swallowed thought. For a moment, the noise was all there was, until the klaxons began. Brace for atmospheric breach, the servitor's voice warned. Failure to comply results in disciplinary detonation. The heat came next, searing, crushing, a physical weight pressing against every bone. The descent felt endless, the craft rattling as if it might tear itself apart. Through the tiny viewport, the world below came into view. A blackened landscape of trenches, burning ruins, and shattered manufactura. The target was an enemy stronghold, once imperial, now held by heretics. Somewhere down there, other regiments of the Astra Militarum were fighting, bleeding, dying. And now, we were their distraction. The lander hit ground with the violence of a hammer. The restraints unlocked automatically, and the ramp dropped into chaos. Gunfire erupted the instant it touched dirt. Bolter rounds screamed overhead. Lasfire split the air into ribbons of heat, and the first men who stepped outside were shredded before they took 3 steps. Move! The commissar roared, his bolt pistol cracking a man beside him who had hesitated. Forward! For the Emperor's mercy! The words didn't inspire. They commanded, and command was law. I ran because everyone else did. The air was thick with dust and the stench of ozone. I stumbled over bodies. Ours, theirs, it didn't matter. Blood was just blood in the end. The sky flickered with artillery flashes, and the ground trembled with every impact. Around me, men screamed, prayed, died. The collars blinked red like stars in a dying firmament. We were pushed toward the ruins of a hab block, what remained of a city before the heretics burned it. Enemy fire poured from shattered windows. Someone behind me fell, clutching his neck as his collar flared. Maybe a stray Las round hit the control node. He didn't even have time to scream before his head was gone. I ducked behind a crumbling wall, gasping for air. Across the street, a figure in black armor stood framed in the smoke. Not Imperial, not anymore. The heretic's face was hidden behind a crude iron mask painted with a parody of the Aquila. He raised a stubber, the rounds tearing chunks of stone beside my head. I fired back, the lasgun kicking weakly against my shoulder, its charge pack already half spent. When the heretic fell, he did so soundlessly. Just a heap of armor and filth. Up! A voice barked beside me. It was Sergeant Hadron, one of us once, now promoted by survival. His collar blinked the same red as mine. Move! They're flanking! We pushed forward again, stumbling over rubble and corpses, the ground slick beneath our boots. Ahead, The commissar stood atop a mound of debris, waving his pistol like a banner. "Advance!" he screamed. "Advance, or burn in your own cowardice!" A man to my left turned to run. His collar detonated instantly, spraying us with what was left of him. The smell clung to my tongue. I kept running. There was no other direction to go. By midday, if you could call the gray sky day, the assault had turned into slaughter. Every charge was met with walls of fire, but the Penal Legion did not retreat. We couldn't. Behind us stood men with detonators, and before us, enemies who would show no mercy. Between the two, survival was just another illusion. When the order finally came, stronghold secured, it felt like a cruel joke. There was no stronghold left, only rubble and silence. Of the 200 who had landed, fewer than 50 stood breathing. The rest were unrecognizable. Limbs, heat scars, ash. We were told to hold position. Reinforcements never came. We waited in the ruin as night fell, the sky turning from gray to the deep purple of dying embers. In the distance, the manufacturer burned, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. I sat against a wall, laser gun in hand, too tired to even shake. Across from me, a man hummed softly, a tune I almost recognized. "We did it," he said, his voice hollow. "We won." I looked around at the ruins, the corpses, the smoldering ground. "Did we?" I asked. He didn't answer. The Vox crackled again. The commissar's voice, calm, precise. "All surviving penal units, prepare for redeployment at dawn. The Emperor smiles upon your zeal." Zeal. That's what they called it when the condemned refused to die fast enough. The night wind carried the smell of promethium and blood. And as the fires burned, I realized something simple, something pure. We weren't soldiers. We were ammunition, and the Imperium had an endless supply. Dawn never really came on that world. The sky stayed a dull, perpetual gray, as if the sun had given up trying to rise over such a place. The air was heavy with the scent of promethium and rot, and every breath tasted of iron. We'd slept in the ruins, if you could call closing your eyes for a few minutes between bombardments sleep, and by the time the sirens began again, none of us were surprised. The Penal Legion didn't rest. It only paused long enough to reload. The commissar stood before us, flanked by servitors bearing rebreathers and data slates. He read off casualty counts as if reciting a prayer, his tone unchanging. 200 went in. 47 came out. No medals, no promotions. Just another line on a report that would vanish into the endless bureaucracy of the Astra Militarum. Then came the next order, a frontal assault on the enemy's secondary trench line. No armor support, no heavy artillery. We were the artillery. I remember looking down the line, seeing faces I barely recognized, all gaunt and hollow-eyed. Some muttered prayers, some kissed amulets, some just stared at nothing at all. You stop thinking of survival at some point. You stop believing in the next hour. You just wait for the next order and obey. When the charge began, it wasn't a heroic roar. It was a shuffle, a collective push into hell. The ground was a mire of mud and blood. Glass fire streaked through the fog like veins of light, cutting men down mid-step. Explosions threw bodies into the air. I tripped once and landed face first into the muck, tasting it, choking on it, crawling until I could stand again. Around me, the screams of the wounded mixed with the mechanical drone of servitors recording the advance. The Adeptus Mechanicus wanted data. The commissariat wanted results. The Emperor wanted silence. Halfway across the field, a man beside me stopped running. He dropped his weapon, dropped to his knees, and began to sob. "No more," he whispered. "No more." Before anyone could speak, his collar flared. There was a pop, then a wet noise, and nothing left above his shoulders. The smell of burnt flesh joined the fog. We kept running. When we reached the trenches, there was no formation left. Just chaos. The heretics fought like animals, their armor daubed with sigils that made the eyes ache to look at. They screamed praises to things best left unnamed. We met them in the mud, bayonets and blades where ammunition had run dry. The sound was wet and close and endless. One of them leapt at me with a rusted cleaver, and I fired my lasgun point blank. The beam burned through his jaw, the light bursting from his skull like a sunrise. He fell without a sound, and I just stood there, shaking, staring at what I'd done. Then came the second wave. Not ours, theirs. They poured over the trench walls like ants, shrieking in tongues older than the stars. The commissar's voice rang out again, hoarse but commanding. "Hold the line! Redemption lies in obedience." I didn't believe him, but I obeyed anyway. Fear and faith aren't so different when death stands a step away. The world narrowed to the rhythm of the lasgun's pulse and the pounding in my chest. My hands blistered against the weapon's heat. My vision tunneled. The line broke, then reformed, then broke again. I saw Hadron, the makeshift sergeant, rally 3 men behind a mound of corpses. He was shouting something, but the sound was drowned by artillery. When I looked again, he was gone, swallowed by smoke and shrapnel. Hours passed like seconds. The battlefield became a blur of movement and screams and silence. When it was over, I was standing knee-deep in the dead. The heretics had fallen back. Or maybe they'd just run out of things to kill. The commissar walked the trench, marking survivors on his slate. When he passed me, he paused. "You endured," he said simply. "The Emperor notes endurance." I wanted to laugh, but my throat was too dry. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, blackened with soot and blood. The lasgun was empty, its power pack spent. I dropped it and sat against the trench wall. The mud sucked at my boots, whispering like something alive. The night fell again, or maybe it never left. Fires burned across the horizon, painting the world in red and shadow. Someone started singing, a low, broken hymn to the Emperor. Others joined in, voices cracked, off-key, desperate. It wasn't faith. It was defiance. I understood then what the Penal Legion truly was. Not soldiers, not martyrs. Just men too dangerous to keep, too useful to waste, too stubborn to die quickly. And in that revelation, amid the ruin and smoke, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was madness. Maybe it was faith. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of belief. Not in redemption, but in survival for its own sake. Because in the Emperor's wars, that was the only miracle that still meant anything. They came for us at dawn again. As always, a dawn made of smoke and sirens instead of light. The ground was still wet from the night's bombardments, the air thick with the smell of scorched flesh and promethium. We'd fought, bled, and somehow survived another assault. But survival didn't mean rest. In the Penal Legion, it only meant you hadn't yet outlived your usefulness. The regular guard had moved on, their banners bright against the pale horizon, their armor gleaming under the flickering sky. We remained behind, stripped of weapons until the next suicide mission. The commissars called it containment. The rank and file called it what it was, caging the dangerous beasts. A column of figures approached from the command outpost, their steps measured, deliberate. At their head walked a man who seemed carved from the same stone as the world itself. Lord Commissar Varlin. His uniform was immaculate, his boots polished to a mirror's sheen despite the mud that claimed everything else. His eyes were gray, cold, unblinking, the kind of gaze that could make a man confess crimes he hadn't yet committed. Behind him shuffled a tech priest, his metal limbs whispering in the dust, and a mini-storum priest whose voice carried the constant murmur of half-formed litanies. Together, they made a trinity of control: law, machine, and faith, the holy trinity of imperial order. Varlen didn't shout. He didn't need to. "Legion," he began, his voice precise. the vox grill of his power mask amplifying each word with metallic finality. "You have been weighed, you have been burned, and you remain. That makes you useful." He paused, his eyes sweeping over us like a targeting system. "Remember, you are not soldiers. You are debtors to the Emperor, and your debt is endless." The priest stepped forward, holding aloft a small, rusted aquila. "Redemption lies in obedience," he cried. "Faith is your weapon, loyalty your armor." His words were meant to inspire, but they only deepened the silence. Faith had no place here, not in the mud, not in the stink, not among men with explosives around their necks. Then came the tech priest's turn. His voice was static, a blend of human syllables and binary cant. "Collar recalibration commencing," he intoned. His mechadendrites hissed as they reached toward us, connecting to each collar's port in turn. We stood still, every muscle frozen. The faintest twitch during recalibration could trigger the failsafe. When it was my turn, the metal limb brushed my throat, cold and humming with power. I stared straight ahead, watching the horizon while he worked. For a moment, I wondered what would happen if I moved, if I coughed, if I blinked wrong. The thought was almost comforting. When it was over, the tech priest's voice buzzed again. "System stable. All subjects operational. Subjects. Not soldiers, not men. Just machinery made of meat." Varlin nodded once. "You will deploy again soon. The heretics regroup beyond the Manufactorum ruins. You will soften their line before the Emperor's chosen regiments advance." His tone carried no malice, only indifference. The Penal Legion was not meant to win. We were meant to make others' victories possible. As the officers departed, the silence returned. Thick, heavy, almost sacred. No one spoke until they were gone. Then someone muttered, "Softening their line, eh? I think they mean dying first." A ripple of grim laughter followed. In the distance, the Manufactorum's smoke curled into the sky, black and endless. I stared at it for a long time, thinking about how small we were, how easy it was for the Imperium to use us up. But there was something else, too, something growing quietly beneath the fear. A kind of defiance. Maybe it was madness. Or maybe it was the one thing the collars couldn't control. That night, as we huddled around a flickering flame in the ruins, Hadron, somehow alive, his arm now wrapped in dirty bandages, leaned close. "They think we're tools," he said. "But tools break. And when they do, the user bleeds." He smiled then, a thin, dangerous smile. "Let's make them bleed a little." No one answered. But in the dim light, every man's eyes reflected the same thought, the same quiet, forbidden hope. The wind howled through the wreckage of the camp, carrying with it the scent of burning promethium and blood, long dried. Night had fallen hard, pressing down like a weight on the broken earth. Somewhere beyond the perimeter fences, the wounded moaned in half-remembered prayers, and the servitors' vox drones whispered endless reports into the cold. But inside the gutted hab block where we slept, there was only silence. The kind of silence that follows men who know they are already ghosts. We weren't supposed to talk. The commissars forbade it. Words led to thoughts, and thoughts led to rebellion. But words had a way of slipping through cracks, like light through a shattered viewport. Hadron sat opposite me, his arm still wrapped in blood-stained bandages. "You ever wonder," he said quietly, "if they even keep track of us? Our names, I mean. Or are we just numbers until we're ashes?" I shrugged, staring into the flickering light of the lamp between us. "Names don't matter when you're already dead." He gave a rough laugh. "Maybe not, but I'd still like mine back before I go." A man to my left, Karis, thin, hollow-eyed, the kind of man who'd already been broken long before he got here, whispered, Mine was taken with my hands. They branded the number right over the scars. He held them out, trembling. The flesh was a patchwork of burns and stitches. Told me the Emperor didn't need names, only obedience. No one spoke after that. What could we say? The door groaned open then, and a shadow filled the frame. For a heartbeat, I thought it was another commissar, come to drag us into the night for some minor infraction. But it was only the camp priest, Father Elaine, the one who always walked the lines with a broken aquila and eyes that saw too much. Still awake, he said softly. His voice was low, cracked by years of smoke and sand. Good. The Emperor favors the sleepless. He stepped into the light, his robes torn and blackened with soot. Do you know why you're here? Hadrian scoffed. Because we sinned. Elaine tilted his head. All men sin, but the condemned are simply those whose sins are seen. He reached into his robes and drew out a small, dented flask. You fight not for redemption, he said, passing it around, but because faith demands endurance. Every breath you take is a prayer, whether you know it or not. When the flask reached me, I hesitated. The liquid inside smelled like engine oil and burned sugar. I drank anyway. It burned all the way down, harsh, alive, real. The priest smiled faintly. Good. Pain means the body remembers its duty. Before anyone could answer, a sharp crack echoed from outside. A gunshot, close. The priest didn't flinch. He only sighed, as if it were inevitable. Discipline, he said quietly. The Emperor's most perfect gift. Through the broken window, we saw the glow of torches in the distance. A firing squad. A prisoner stood before the commissar, his knees shaking, his collar blinking faster than a heartbeat. Whatever he'd done, it didn't matter. The sentence was always the same. The shot rang again, and the light faded. Karis turned away. Hadrian's jaw clenched. I just stared into the dark until the image burned itself into memory. Later, when the camp had gone still again, I found myself whispering, not to anyone else, not even to the Emperor, just to the night. If this is redemption, I said softly, then let me never be forgiven. The words hung there, fragile, dangerous. Hadrian heard them but didn't respond. He just nodded once, as if he understood, as if, in his own way, he'd prayed the same prayer. That night, something changed. Maybe it was the priest's words, or the gunfire, or just the knowledge that the chains around our necks weren't the only ones we carried. But among the condemned, something like loyalty began to grow. Not to the Imperium, not to the commissars, but to each other. When dawn came, we were different men, still damned, still expendable, but bound together now, not by faith or fear, by defiance. And when the sirens screamed again, calling us to another battle, we didn't march for redemption. We marched for the only thing we had left, each other. The campaign had stretched into its third month, though it felt like a lifetime. The days bled into each other, stitched together by gunfire and the hiss of last rounds through dust-choked air. The manufactorum ruins we once fought to take now served as our base, if you could call it that. Piles of rubble and twisted rebar were our walls, and the corpses of the fallen our sandbags. The air stank of ozone, decay, and something else that had no name, something that made the hairs at the back of your neck rise. No one spoke much anymore. We didn't need to. We'd learned each other's silences better than any language. But lately, those silences were being broken by whispers. At first, We thought it was the wind, the constant groaning of the metal skeletons of the old city. But soon, we began to hear words in them. It started small, a murmur over the voxnet, faint and garbled. "He sees you." The officers dismissed it as interference, the static of overloaded channels. But then it came again, clearer, softer, always the same phrase. Some said it was a fragment of an old imperial hymn, the kind sung in shrines long abandoned. Others said it was madness. One night, as we huddled around a broken generator for warmth, Karras began to hum under his breath. It was the same tune the Vox had whispered. When I asked him where he'd heard it, he smiled, that kind of distant, hollow smile that meant something in him had already gone. "He's watching us," he said. "The Emperor, closer than he's ever been." Hadrian spat into the dirt. "The Emperor doesn't watch scum like us." Karras shook his head. "You don't understand. He's here. I saw him in the fire last night. The light moved. It moved like it was alive." We laughed, then quietly, nervously. But in the dark, when the laughter died, we all felt it. The weight in the air. The way the shadows seemed to move when no one was looking. The next morning, a patrol went missing. 3 men sent to scout the northern ruins. When their locator beacons finally activated, the signal came from deep inside the manufactorum's sub-levels. A recovery team went in. What came back wasn't human. Or maybe it was, once. They said the bodies were found kneeling, heads bowed, faces burned clean off by heat that had no source. Their collars were still intact, lights blinking calmly, as if nothing had happened. The commissar declared it an enemy trap, a Psykers trick. The priest, Father Elaine, called it a sign. "The Emperor purges impurity in all forms," he told us, eyes alight with fervor. "Even through fire, his light cleanses." But when I looked around at the men listening, I saw something else. Not faith, but fear. Fear that maybe the Emperor really was watching, and what he saw disgusted him. That night, the Vox whispered again, louder this time. The words came through the static like breath in the ear. "You are not forsaken." I sat upright, heart pounding, staring into the dark. Hadrian was awake too, his eyes reflecting the dim red glow of his collar. "You heard it," he said. Not a question, a statement. I nodded. He exhaled, long and slow. Maybe this is what redemption feels like. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think there was purpose in the endless dying. But all I could see when I closed my eyes were the kneeling corpses, their burned faces turned toward something none of us could see. And for the first time since I'd been condemned, I found myself praying, not for forgiveness, not even for life, just for the whispers to stop. They didn't. That night, every man in the camp dreamed the same dream, a throne of gold, burning in silence, and a single voice whispering through the fire, "Serve and be seen." When we woke, the air smelled of incense, and somewhere in the distance the ruins sang. By the time the 4th moon rose, something inside the Legion had begun to break, not in body, but in spirit. The whispers had spread like infection, moving through the ranks in murmurs and half-seen gestures. Some claimed they could feel warmth in their collars, like the Emperor himself had reached out through the circuits to touch them. Others spoke of visions, of light crawling across the ground, of a figure made of gold standing amidst the fire, watching. The commissars called it fatigue. The priests called it revelation. None of us knew which was worse. The camp was quiet now in the wrong kind of way. No laughter, no curses, not even the usual groans of the wounded. Just a silence waiting to crack. The nights grew longer, or maybe we just stopped sleeping. I caught Karis one evening standing by the perimeter wire, eyes fixed on the ruins beyond. "He's calling," he said when I approached. "Can't you hear it? The Emperor's song?" Before I could answer, he walked forward, right into the open. His collar blinked once, twice, then went dark. Not detonated, just off. He kept walking, fading into the fog. No explosion, no scream, nothing. The next morning, the commissar gathered us. His voice was harder than usual, stripped of ceremony. "You will forget what you think you saw," he said. "You will remember only duty." But I saw it, the faint tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted toward the fog. He was afraid. The following days blurred into one long fever. Men began to pray without instruction, carving sigils of the Aquila into their arms until the blood ran in patterns. Father Elaine moved among them like a prophet, whispering sermons no one else could hear. "The Emperor is not distant," he said. "He walks where the faithful bleed." His words lit something in the men, something bright and wrong. Then came the siege. The heretics returned, howling through the ruins, their war machines grinding over bones and rubble. The Legion was thrown into the breach again, but this time they didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like believers. Collars flared red in the dark as men charged screaming into the fire, not out of fear, out of ecstasy. I saw one man drop his weapon and lift his arms to the sky as a shell tore him apart. He died smiling, his lips mouthing a prayer I couldn't hear. Amid the chaos, Father Elaine walked through the smoke unharmed, his robes untouched by the flames. "Do not fear the fire," he cried. "Through it we are seen." I dragged Hadrian behind a broken wall. "He's mad," I shouted. "He'll get us all killed." Hadrian's face was streaked with ash and disbelief. "Maybe," he said, "but if the Emperor really is watching, maybe madness is the only way to be noticed." The ground shook as another explosion lit the horizon. The air reeked of ozone and blood. I stared at the advancing line of heretics, their banners burning with blasphemous light, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know which side I feared more, the enemy or the God who might finally be listening. By the time the dust settled, half the Legion was gone. The others wandered the ruins, praying to things unseen. Some swore they could hear singing in the wind. Others tore off their collars and screamed when they didn't explode. The commissar shot those men without hesitation, but when he turned away, I saw him glance up at the burning sky. Just once, quickly, as if searching for something beyond the smoke. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karis walking into the fog, the light of his collar dimming like the last ember of a dying fire. And I couldn't help but wonder, what if he had reached something real? What if the whispers weren't madness at all? By the 6th week, the sky had turned the color of bruised flesh. The sun, if it still existed behind that pall of smoke, was nothing more than a dying ember, lost in the haze. The air was thick enough to chew, a mixture of ash, promethium, and the smell of rotting armor. There were so few of us left now that the Legion no longer formed ranks. We were a scattered pack of remnants clinging to the ruins of the Manufactorum like insects too stubborn to die. The orders came through the Vox, distorted but unmistakable. Penal Detachment 77 will hold the eastern approach until relief arrives. We all knew what that meant. No one was coming. We were the relief, a buffer between the oncoming storm and the Imperial Guard regiments retreating behind us. The commissar didn't even pretend otherwise. His voice was quiet when he gathered us beneath the shattered dome of what had once been a cathedral. "The Emperor has seen fit to grant you one last chance at redemption," he said. "You will hold this ground until the enemy breaks upon you or until your collars run cold. Either way, your names will be remembered in his light." No one laughed this time. not even Hadron. There was something almost peaceful in the air, the calm before the inevitable, the kind that settles over men who've already accepted their death. We fortified what we could, overturned chimera husks, broken statuary, walls of sandbags filled with dirt and bones. The heretics were coming again, and this time they brought engines. We could hear them long before we saw them. The grinding of treads, the war cries that sounded like laughter twisted through a throat full of nails. Father Elaine moved among us, his eyes wild, his voice low and fevered. "The Emperor walks among you," he whispered. "His hand guides your aim. His breath steadies your heart. Through fire, you will ascend." I didn't believe him. Not entirely. But when the first shells landed and the world split apart, I found myself whispering his words anyway. The assault came like a tidal wave. Mutants, cultists, machines stitched together from bone and steel. They crashed against our defenses with unholy fervor. The ground vanished in flame, and the sky filled with tracer fire that painted the air in streaks of red and gold. The first line broke within minutes. Men screamed, collars flashing as they fell. I remember dragging Hadron behind cover as a round punched through his leg. He cursed, blood bubbling from his lips, but kept firing. Around us, the Legion fought like cornered beasts, not disciplined, not organized, but unstoppable in their fury. The collars blinked faster and faster, some exploding, some simply going dark. And then, for the first time, the impossible happened. The signal, the invisible leash that bound us, cut out. The lights on our collars flickered once, then died. Silence. For a heartbeat, none of us moved. We looked at each other, stunned. "Free!" Hadron laughed, a mad, broken sound. "Looks like the Emperor's mercy finally ran out." The commissar, standing atop the barricade, saw it too. He hesitated, a single moment of human confusion, before raising his bolt pistol. "Hold the line!" he roared. But there was no command in it anymore, only fear. We didn't run. We didn't surrender. We fought harder, because for the first time since our sentencing, our lives, our deaths, belonged to us. The Legion surged forward with renewed fury, cutting down heretics in waves. It was chaos, but it was ours. I can still feel it. The way the air vibrated, the way the earth shook underfoot. It wasn't victory we were chasing. It was meaning. Every shot fired, every swing of the bayonet was a statement carved in blood. We were here. We mattered. The battle burned through the night and into the next day. By dawn, the heretics began to falter. Their machines ground to a halt. Their chants turned to screams. We had nothing left to give. But we gave it anyway. When the last enemy fell, the world was quiet again. Truly quiet. For the first time in months, the smoke drifted away, revealing the ruins of the cathedral and the bodies of my brothers in chains strewn across its steps. The aquila carved into the wall above us was cracked, half buried, but still there. I fell to my knees before it, hands shaking, vision blurred. I didn't pray. I didn't thank the Emperor. I just whispered their names, the names the Imperium had stripped from us. Karis, Hadron, Elaine, every one of them, spoken aloud into the silence, and for the first time, I felt something like peace. The collars lay scattered across the ground, their lights dead, their purpose fulfilled. The last one still pulsed faintly in the dust. Mine. I picked it up and stared at the tiny, flickering diode, wondering if it was waiting for a signal that would never come. When it finally went dark, I smiled. The battlefield was quiet now, and that silence carried its own kind of violence. It pressed against the ears, heavy, suffocating, full of ghosts. The fires had burned down to smoldering veins of ember among the ruins, and every gust of wind sent a soft cascade of ash spiraling upward like a mockery of snowfall. The sky was the color of gunmetal, a vast and empty dome that seemed to stare down in judgment. I moved through what was left of the camp, though calling it a camp now felt like blasphemy. It was a graveyard. The earth was soft beneath my boots, thick with the dead. No distinction between heretic and soldier anymore. The war had swallowed them both, ground them together into the same unrecognizable paste. The air smelled of rust and sanctity. Hadrian lay near the cathedral steps, one arm flung out as though he'd tried to point at something in the sky before the end. I knelt beside him. His eyes were open but clouded, his lips parted in that half-smile he wore when defying death had become a habit. I closed his eyes with shaking hands and whispered, "You made them bleed, brother. You made them remember." A faint sound drifted on the wind, not the crackle of fire, not the groan of settling metal, but chanting. I turned and saw them coming through the haze. Soldiers of the regular Astra Militarum, clean uniforms, polished weapons, faces hidden behind rebreathers. They moved like ghosts among ghosts, rifles raised, steps cautious. Behind them came the commissar. Not Varlin, but another, younger, with eyes too unscarred to have known what we'd lived. He stared at the devastation, at the heaps of bodies, at the twisted collars littering the ground. "Saints, preserve us," one trooper whispered. The commissar bent to pick up a collar. Its light flickered once, dimly, before dying completely. "Penal Detachment 77, he said, reading from the unit tag etched into its metal. "Declared lost 2 days ago." He turned it over, frowning. "No detonation signals recorded. The control codes were never sent," a sergeant muttered. "Then why are they all dead?" The commissar looked around at the carnage, at the scorched stone, the broken aquila, the cratered ground where the heretic engines had fallen silent. "Because they chose to be," he said quietly. "Because they fought when they didn't have to." He knelt beside Hadrian's body, gloved fingers brushing over the half-melted aquila charm still clutched in the man's hand. For a moment, I thought he might say a prayer, but instead, he rose and spoke into his vox. "Mark this site for sanctification. The Emperor's work was done here." The soldiers began their grim task, collecting the dog tags, tagging the corpses, stacking the weapons. I stayed hidden in the shadows of the cathedral's ruins, watching. I didn't speak, didn't move. To them, I was already dead. Another nameless convict claimed by duty. I wanted it that way. As the squads moved off, one lingered near the altar. He was young, barely old enough to shave, his armor too large for his frame. He noticed the cracked aquila carved into the wall and paused, tracing its surface with his fingers. Then he whispered, almost reverently, "They said Penal 77 was damned. Doesn't look like damnation to me." When they were gone, I stepped into the open, the ash crunching under my boots. The horizon was burning again. New fires, new wars. They would never end. The Imperium did not run out of bodies. It only found new ways to break them. I stood before the broken aquila for a long time. The faint light of dawn bleeding through the smoke. The cracks in the symbol caught the light, glowing faintly gold. I thought of Father Elaine's words, "Through fire, you will ascend." Maybe he had been right. Maybe the Emperor had watched. Or maybe he hadn't, and we'd only imagined meaning to make the dying bearable. It didn't matter anymore. Faith, doubt, both were luxuries of the living. What we had found was something rarer. Defiance, sharpened into grace. I walked out of the ruins as the wind picked up, carrying with it the ash of the fallen. It swirled around me, clinging to my skin, my clothes, my breath. A shroud and a baptism both. Somewhere behind me, the broken collars lay buried under that same dust, silent at last. And in that silence, I realized forgiveness was never something to be granted. It was something we'd already taken. carved out of the galaxy's indifference with our own blood and stubborn will. We had been the condemned. Now we were the remembered. And as the dawn flared weakly across the dead world, I kept walking, nameless, unbound, and, for the first time, truly free.